Welcome to ground control. Today is the day that we take the Zeta Ultra Z Blaze out and do the maiden launch. I got the landing skids fabricated and installed yesterday. That was the last holdup on this jet before I could launch it. I did get my Hobbywing Skywalker 50 amp ESC in. It has a 5 volt 5 amp BEC in it, and it worked great. All I had to do was program the top and the bottom end of the throttle, and no problems whatsoever. I power cycled it half a dozen times, ran it back up. The motor was nice and smooth. The throttle was nice and linear. So luckily at least right now, it doesn't look like I'm going to have any issues with the ESC that I'm going to be using on this 64 millimeter EDF. So I do have it set up as a single 64 millimeter EDF jet. With the landing skids, my all-up weight is a little bit less than I thought it was going to be. So with the 4S 1600 milliamp hour 70C LiPo that I'm going to be using in it, which weighs approximately 180 grams, with the landing skid system that I put on it, my all-up weight is 610.5 grams. The recommended all-up weight on the jet was 600 grams. So with the landing skids, I'm only 10.5 grams over, and I would assume all that 10.5 grams is coming from the landing skid system. So I think if I didn't need that and I was landing on grass, I think I would be right at 600 grams all-up weight on this jet. But it has a large wing area, so I think that it's going to be able to handle that weight just fine. I would be surprised if it didn't have pretty light wing loading, given the fact that the size of that wing area. Alright, so there's not going to be any problem with any airflow on the EDF because it's completely open. My unknowns on this jet. Number one, the thrust line from the EDF unit is above the fuselage, which means it's going to want to push the nose down. In the manual, it states to put in a bunch of reflex on the elevons, and I don't know if you guys know what reflex is. I've heard that term used a couple of times in a couple of different videos that I watched, and reflex is where the trailing edge of the control surface is higher than the leading edge of the wing, and that is the case with this. So I'm not real comfortable with that. I've got it set up on a switch, a 3-position switch, so that if it turns out that I need it on launch, but then it wants to constantly ascend when I have it in the air, I can take out half of the reflex I've got in it now, and then the 3rd position it removes it all together. So I don't know. That's an unknown for me. I don't know. The way it looks, the amount of reflex that I've got on the elevons here, the way it looks, you'd think it would probably nose straight up as soon as I launch it. Or with the thrust angle on the motor, maybe it will nose down really hard when I launch it. I don't know. I'm going to try to launch it at about 75% throttle, because at full throttle, holding it in a static position, it wants to push vertical out of my hand. So I think 75% throttle on launch should be plenty. I want to keep the throttle as low as I can on launch so that it doesn't push the nose down. I would rather it push the nose up than push the nose down. The other unknown, is the unknowns are the thrust angle, the amount of reflex that I've got in it, and whether the landing skids are going to hold up or not. So I've got 3 unknowns. I'm not real enthusiastic about launching this jet for the first time, but we'll go ahead and we'll go out there and we'll launch it, and if I don't destroy it on launch, or if I don't destroy it on landing, we'll put at least one additional flight on it while I'm out there this morning. So I will see you out at the field. Okay, maiden launch of the Blaze. I hope all my hard work pays off. Left, right, up, down.
Got a little more wind than I'd hoped for. The wind is 427. Alright, here we go. Ready? Launching. Oh man, that took right off, guys. I was really nervous about that. I got plenty of elevator in it. I mean, plenty of aileron. I want to see how much elevator I've got here. Not bad. Stay out of the sun. I think I might be able to take some of that reflex out of it. Oh man, do I have a lot of aileron. I've definitely got to reduce that. I don't seem like I'm getting the power that I should be getting from it. Alright, loops are good. Let's see if we can slow it down a little bit. Has a pretty big wing area. Well, it seems to be handling the wind okay. I'm a little twitchy on the aileron though. Alright, I'm walking out here. I'm starting to get my haptic. This is the first time flying this, and I've got a 4S 1600 milliamp hour in it. It looks like it does require all that reflex. Like I said, maybe just taking a little bit of it out. I launched it at 75% throttle. Okay, let's bring it back around and see if we can get it on the ground in one piece. I don't know how well this one is going to float. Alright, let's see if my skids held up. It looks like they did. Well, at least I had a successful maiden flight. I've got to tone down those ailerons, and I think I'm going to take a little bit of the reflex out of it. Skids look like they're in pretty good shape. Yeah, so far so good. Alright, let's see how much juice we have left in the lipo so you can get an idea of the flight time on this. Alright, let me see if I can hold it up here so you guys can see it. 17.89, 3.7, 3.7, 3.7. So maybe about 3.5 minute flight on this 64 millimeter EDF with that 4S 1600 milliamp hour LiPo. It's a 70C. This one weighs 177 grams. So yeah, I was a little nervous on the controls there, guys. Okay, flight number 2 on the Zeta Ultra Z Blaze. I increased the dual rate on the elevators a bit, decreased the dual rate on the ailerons a bit, and decreased the amount of reflex in it a bit. Alright, so let's see what we have. Launching. Oh, that took off nice. I'm launching that at about 75% throttle with this full 4S power. Yeah, I think that amount of reflex that I have in it now is going to work out pretty well. Hope I got that. I was a little too close to myself. Ailerons don't feel twitchy like they were. Oh man, those are nice axial rolls, aren't they, guys? Sweet. I'm running circuits here because I got that big ball of fire right behind me. Pretty nice handling so far. Playing with the throttle. Nice looking jet. You can tell I'm a little nervous on the controls, but I'm not speaking very much, right? Ooh, getting a little wiggle out of it there. I don't know what the wind is up at, 50 or 60 feet in the air, but it's 4 to 7 on the ground here. So far, I'm liking it. I haven't seen any weird behavior out of it yet, so that's good. Look at that. That is a nice axial roll. I never would have believed that this jet was going to require that amount of reflex. When I saw that in the manual, I thought, oh man, this thing is going to nose up on me on launch. Okay, so there's our timer. Let's do a circuit and check our directions here. All right, I look good in both directions. I'll bring it back around. Well, that one doesn't glide as well as the other EDF jets I've flown, even though it has a fairly large wing area. Let's see if my skids are still holding up. I was kind of apprehensive about that too. you never know. Every airframe is different, and so I have to, you know, fabricate different landing skids depending on. Oh, looks like I broke one. Let's see. Nope, nope, it's still there. I take it back. Must have been a shadow. Okay. The only problem I see with my skids is I thought this plastic was going to be tougher than nails, and on the rear it's already cracking on me, so I'm going to have to fabricate some different plastic shoes for those skids before I bring it back out again. But so far I'm pretty happy with it on the first couple of flights, even though I'm just really nervous. I do wish it had more power than it has. It's about the same weight as the F86 that I pulled the EDF unit out of. So I thought I would have a little better vertical on full 4S power. I may. I think before I put it in the air again, I think I'm going to reprogram that throttle range again. Maybe I'm not getting full throttle. It doesn't feel like I'm getting as much thrust out of it as I was when I first set it up. You know, just holding it and giving 100% throttle and seeing how well it was going to push vertical at full weight. And I really thought it would have better vertical than that. So maybe I need to reprogram the throttle range again. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with it so far. I'm really nervous on the stick. Hopefully in the next couple of flights I won't be so nervous. But I will see you back at the hangar, and I'll give you the details on how I got this set up, my amp draw, my all-up weight, all that information. I'll see you back at the hangar.
Okay, so I am so glad the maiden launch is over. And I'm so glad it was successful. So my worries about the CG, because as we all know, sometimes on these factory planes, the specified CG is way off. And sometimes, once in a blue moon, it's so far off that the aircraft is uncontrollable if you use the specified CG. So the specified CG and the amount of reflex on the elevons was just about spot on. I couldn't believe when I launched that at 75% throttle, it took off like an arrow when I released it. It just maintained its line. I was so worried about that initial launch. Man. The adjustments I made between the maiden launch and the second launch were a huge improvement with the ailerons, the elevator, and the amount of reflex that I had in it. Now, I like the roll rate that I have in it now, so I don't want to touch the dual rate. But I do want it to be a little bit smoother at mid-stick. So I'm going to increase my expo by about 10 points. And I think right now, I think I have it at 50. I think I have it at 50 on the expo. I increased the expo from the maiden flight before I launched it the second time because the ailerons were really twitchy at mid-stick on that maiden flight. The elevator felt good. As a matter of fact, I increased the elevator, decreased the aileron. Huge improvement. I like the roll rate now. I just want it smoother at mid-stick. I'm going to try reducing the amount of reflex a little bit more. It seemed like at high speed it wanted to climb ever so slightly. And so the specified CG was 60 millimeters to 63 millimeters back from where the wing attaches to the fuselage. I had it set with a neutral balance at 60 millimeters. So I think I'm going to move that back to 62 millimeters with a neutral balance and decrease the reflex a little bit at the same time and see what that does. So far, I would have to say that this is the easiest to launch and easiest to land EDF jet that I have launched and landed so far. This is my 5th EDF jet so far. And it's a piece of cake. Launching this is just a piece of cake. You know, I've got two other EDF jets that are really easy to launch. but nothing like this. This is the easiest one to launch and the easiest one to land, because I actually was bringing this in pretty slow. And let me see, they weren't spectacular landings, but compared to my landings with the other EDF jets that I have to bring in with a little more speed, the first two landings on this went pretty darn well. So I'm really happy with that. I did look at the voltage left on the LiPo after both flights. So the maiden flight, you don't know, you don't want it to stall on the maiden flight. So I kept the speed up quite a bit during the first half of that flight. And when I landed, I had 3.72 volts per cell. So based on that number, the way I was flying it on the maiden flight, on the second flight, I was cruising around a lot slower than I was during the maiden flight. And I was only hammering the throttle every once in a while. So mixed flying, you know, cruising around probably more than half of the time, and then in the throttle a little bit less than half of the time during the flight. You could fly it with that 4S LiPo that I had in it. It's a Nanotech 4S, 1600 milliamp hour, 70C LiPo. I could fly if I could land it when I needed to land it. If I knew that I wasn't going to have to make any circuits waiting for somebody to get out of the way. If I could put it on the ground when I needed to put it on the ground, I would be able to fly this for 4 minutes, leaving a little over 3.5 volts per cell. That's not too bad. If you're at a lower altitude, I would be putting probably an 1800 to 2000 milliamp hour 4S LiPo in it, because you'll get more lift and more power at a lower altitude. And I think that if you do that, I think you flying it the way I was flying it with mixed mode, I think you'd be able to get a 5-minute flight out of it. I really do. So it has even with that 180 milliamp hour LiPo I had in, it had very light wing loading. You saw that it was pretty darn maneuverable at slow speed. I was cruising around at about 50 to 60% throttle, just cruising around, making fairly tight turns with it. I wasn't making them abruptly. I was making the turns pretty smoothly, but they were pretty short, radius turns that I was making with it. Now, as I get more comfortable with it and get it all trimmed out and handling precisely the way I want it, then I'll be pulling tighter turns and tighter maneuvers with it. But I am so happy that I retired the F-86 airframe and took the EDF unit and the receiver and the servos out of it and put in this one. Okay, I think I already mentioned my all-up weight with the landing skids is 610.5 grams with that 4S LiPo. What else was I going to talk about? I'm not going to give you any of the numbers off of the control surfaces yet until I get everything lined out. And then once I do that, I will post that information on our Facebook page. I'll create a setup file for it, and I will also publish my OpenTX model file for it for download if you guys want to do that. It's a pretty nice jet, I have to say. It was very stable, and it looked like it's going to be a pretty forgiving airframe, looking at what I was doing with it out there today. So as I get more comfortable with it, I'll be doing, better maneuvers with it, flying it slower, lower and closer and faster. Once I know that there's not going to be any bad tendencies with it. What else was I going to say? Oh, I put it on a load meter with a fully charged LiPo, and the peak amps at full throttle on full 4S was 36.4 amps. At mid-stick, at 50% throttle, was about 12.5 amps. So a pretty big drop off from 50% throttle to 100% throttle on that 64 millimeter EDF. The other recommendation that I would make with the 64 millimeter EDF unit, this has adequate power to do the maneuvers that I normally do with the EDF jet that's just bank and yank. Doing vertical climbs with it, doing big huge loops with it, doing split S maneuvers, things of that nature. It has adequate power, but I didn't feel like I had any power in reserve, you know what I mean? This EDF unit just has a 5-blade fan. If my recommendation would be, if you guys are interested in this jet, I would get a 64 millimeter EDF unit with an 11 or 12 blade fan in it and a larger 4S LiPo that I spoke about. And I think that would be, not only would it produce more thrust, but I think it would be more efficient at the same time. Just looking at my 50 millimeter EDF jets that have 11 and 12 blade fans on them. They produce pretty good thrust for that size EDF unit, and they're pretty efficient at the same time. So I have an FMS 64 millimeter EDF unit that I think has an 11 or 12 blade fan in it. I may go ahead and switch that out with this, but we'll see. So stay tuned. I'm going to be, as soon as I get my skid shoes replaced on this, I'm going to be taking it back out as soon as I have the weather again and putting it back in the air. Try to get it, hopefully get out there with less wind and get it nice and finely tuned. And then I can give you guys my setup and OpenTX model file on it. But so far, I'm very impressed with this airframe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the air.